Just like a captain or a Spock type, the medical officer of a starship and/or starbase has become an iconic mainstay of the Star Trek universe. With every incarnation, the franchise has come with a new medical professional, each with their own personality and in most cases, stunning ability to heal bizarre space diseases or injuries. There have been multiple Doctors on single series, even multiple versions of the same Doctor, all fodder for a generations-old debate over who's the better medical officer. Now, whichever Doctor is your favourite, our prescription is a hypo spray full of PCS, Pulaski's chicken soup. You can inject that, right? That works. This is every Star Trek medical officer ranked. Number 11, Phil Boyce. As Star Trek's very first Doctor, Phil Boyce holds a special place in the franchise, despite only a single appearance in the very first unaired pilot, The Cage, and of course, archive footage in the Menagerie. Boyce is also notable right out of the gate for medicating Captain Pike and self-medicating right along with him with a Medikit Martini in our first introduction to the character. That's the kind of Doctor I want. Here, antibiotics and alcohol. There you go, mate. As the prototype Star Trek medical officer, Boyce is established in the pilot as a sounding board for Pike, a relationship that would be duplicated when Trek went to air with the role swapped out for Kirk and McCoy. With the return of Captain Christopher Pike, both in the Kelvin timeline films and later in Star Trek Discovery alongside another Cage favourite number 1, maybe now's the time for the return of Dr. Phil Boyce in the Pike spin-off series Strange New Worlds. Number 10, Serenas EMH. Unlike Star Trek Voyager's counterpart, who evolved to become his own fully realised holographic man, the Serenas EMH from Star Trek Picard is basically just equipment. This EMH also has no control over its activation sequence, as demonstrated by Agnes' pretty troublesome ability to deactivate the EMH so she could go and murder her ex in Stardust City Rag. The Serenas EMH is in fact less effective as a supplemental medical officer than it is at embodying one of the many broken pieces of the ship's captain Chris Rios' personality. As described by the emergency hospitality hologram, Rios liked to keep his own company, so he programmed the EMH and the other emergency holograms to look just like him. Anyone else find that a little bit weird? Number 9, Tracy Pollard. Following the death of Star Trek Discovery's Dr. Hugh Culber in Despite Yourself, Dr. Tracy Pollard stepped in to become one of the show's de facto medical officers in the following episodes. We don't know much about Pollard other than her cheeky bedside manner. We do, however, know that Dr. Pollard is another in the long, proud line of Star Trek doctors willing to let her patients undergo questionable procedures, as in Vaulting Ambition, when she allowed captive L'Rell to perform a bizarre finger-wavy species reassignment on Ash Tyler. Pollard also cleared Saru for duty almost immediately after he endured a metamorphosis/puberty which she, had no past experience of, further indicating that Pollard's medical standards are liberal.
Yes, hello there everybody. Sorry to interrupt Marcus's video, but Adam Cleary here to pull back the content curtain for 1 second and say that we actually recorded this video months and months and months ago, and I am going to be damned if I allow it to go out on YouTube without giving Dr. Tana, the greatest character introduced in New Trek so far, fight me holographic Rios, her due props. Now, Dr. Tana is the Chief Medical Officer aboard the USS Cerritos in Star Trek Lower Deck. She is a Cation, which nobody is completely sure how to pronounce, and in my opinion, she fits around about here in the ranking of greatest doctors of all time. Well, greatest Star Trek doctors of all time. You've also got to include, like, Dr. Doolittle, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and the Doctor from all the Doctor jokes. They're quite good too, but you get the point. Now, I'd love to rank her higher because I find her absolutely hysterical. We're going to hear a little bit later in the list about how some doctors were underserved in certain seasons and how their arc suffered and how the performances suffered as a result. But despite the fact she's never really had a single episode about her yet, I think what they've done with the little screen time she's had is absolutely fantastic. They give her some of the greatest one-liners in Star Trek ever. Nobody is authorized to pass out. You look like a f***ing scratching post. Is he f***ing serious? Yes, Star Trek now relies on obscenities to be funny, but obscenities are funny, and as a result, so is Dr. Tana. Also, it's just like a crotchety old cat in a lab coat. Like, what is not to love about that? I'm absolutely delighted, by the way, they haven't done any Cations in live action Star Trek properly. I know there's been one or two in the background because there's no way to make that look good. But animated, it's just literally a cat in a lab coat. And I love cats in lab coats. Anyway, that's it. There's not too much we can really say about her at this stage. I just wanted it to get a bit of recognition in this part of the video so nobody can be in the comments like, wait, what about Dr. Tana? And then I've got to reply to all of them being like, yeah, she's excellent. We just recorded this video months ago, so I'm just getting in ahead of all that to say, here she is, this is where she goes. And who knows, maybe in years to come she'll go higher up the rankings, but you just can't really elevate somebody too much when they've only been around for one season and they haven't really felt like that big a part of the crew. Sorry, I'm just getting a quick message. Sorry, go ahead. We've put Pulaski where?
Number 8, Leonard Bones McCoy. Kelvin timeline. Speaking of liberal doctoring, one of the first things we see the Kelvin McCoy do is deliberately induce the side effects of the vaccine to protect against the Mulvarian mud fleas to smuggle Cadet Kirk aboard the Enterprise. Also, in Star Trek Into Darkness, McCoy used a dead tribble to experiment with Khan's superblood. Where do you get the tribble from? Where do you get the tribble from? And in Star Trek Beyond, he just went around ripping shrapnel out of people. My God, man! With just these few examples, it's not clear how he stacks up to his Prime Universe counterpart in the medical field, but Carl Urban's performance as McCoy is a bright spot in the reboot movies. Number 7, Hugh Culber. When you mention Star Trek Discovery's Dr. Hugh Culber, the first thing that comes to mind is why Ash Tyler never suffered any real consequences for murdering him, other than getting a little roughed up by the resurrected Culber in the episode, if memory serves. Regardless of all that, Dr. Culber is back to life, back to reality. And in season 2, they actually take the time to dramatise the emotional toll that would take place if you were killed and then resurrected. And this is something that the franchise has previously played a little bit fast and loose with. All that aside, Dr. Culber is a capable doctor with much more to bring to the franchise. Number 6, Phlox. When Enterprise premiered in 2001, it looked like Dr. Phlox was poised to be the show's answer to Voyager's Neelix. Thankfully, iffy CGI smile aside, Phlox turned out to be something more interesting and far less annoying. Sorry, Neelix fans. Recruited into the crew of the Enterprise NX-01 from the Interspecies Medical Exchange Program, Phlox's alien perspective served to remind the audience and the Starfleet crew to keep their minds open. He was also an effective medical practitioner using his extensive knowledge and experience to help the new kids on the blocks make it in the interstellar community. He also kept a bunch of animals imprisoned in cages in sickbay, which, in the Mirror Universe, was his counterpart's Chamber of Horrors, but the good Phlox used them to treat the crew of the Enterprise when situations arose. Number 5, Julian Bashir. There's a lot to say about Dr. Julian Bashir. He was a secretly genetically engineered superhuman doctor who loved his teddy bear and making problematic advances on his co-worker Lieutenant Jadzia Dax in what feels like every episode of season 1. Bashir was introduced with his foot in his mouth for the pilot, but was humanized through his friendship with Everyman Chief Miles O'Brien and their frequent trips to the Alamo Holosuite program or Vic Fontaine's Holographic Lounge. Despite his occasional arrogance or self-righteousness and horniness, DS9 consistently portrayed Bashir as a fully capable medical provider who literally entered a man's mind to retrieve the cure for a morphogenic virus that was killing Odo in extreme measures. Number 4, The Doctor. Robert Picardo famously worried his character, the Doctor, had the least interesting role to play when Star Trek Voyager commenced in 1995. Those concerns were clearly unfounded as the Starship Voyager's emergency medical hologram became one of the series' most versatile and thoroughly developed characters. From his origin as a hologram confined to sickbay to an opera virtuoso and expanding his programming to become the emergency command hologram, the Doctor's evolution in Voyager was varied to say the least. Voyager's holodoc also performed some of the franchise's most fantastical medical feats, including resurrecting a totally dead Neelix with Borg nanoprobes, reversing the rapid evolution that turned Captain Janeway and Tom Paris into space salamanders, and they went and did a little bit of and of course transforming the grungy Borg drone into Jerry Ryan. Voyager grappled with the Doctor's existential crisis early, posing the question to us as well as the crew and even himself: was the Doctor truly sentient? Number 3, Catherine Pulaski. A pinch hitter after Gates McFadden left Star Trek The Next Generation during the show's second season, Dana Muldaur's Dr. Pulaski is a blatant stand-in for the crusty McCoy-type Doctor, and was also her own woman. She came into conflict with nearly all of the shipmates, forging an especially tempestuous relationship with Picard and an awkward adversarial relationship with Data, owing to her opinion that Data wasn't as sentient as everyone else seemed to think, which, in hindsight, a little bit racist. Beverly Crusher returned for the season 3, and Pulaski's presence aboard the Enterprise was more or less erased. She was only referenced a couple of times afterwards. Perhaps Pulaski was a necessary disruption of the status quo aboard the sometimes far too cozy Enterprise D. Number 2, Beverly Crusher. As a medical professional, Dr. Crusher has an interesting track record. She was responsible for Star Trek's first deborgification, restoring Picard after his assimilation in the Best of Both Worlds Part 2. She solved the murder mystery through an unauthorized Ferengi autopsy, and she both cured and also inadvertently caused Barclay's Intron virus, which swept through the Enterprise D, transforming the entire crew into prehistoric monster people. Even though Dr. Crusher didn't get to shine in the same way in the features, she is one of the most recognizable and iconic characters of all of Star Trek, and without her, we wouldn't have the dancing doctor teaching Data to tap, someone to silently judge Picard's occasional love interests, or someone to slap Wesley around during the Sarek-induced rage epidemic. Number 1, Leonard Bones McCoy. Dr. Leonard McCoy served aboard the USS Enterprise and the USS Enterprise A for 27 years, retaining his self-proclaimed status as an old country doctor, while also treating the Horta, giving prenatal exams to tribbles, giving mouth-to-mouth to a dying Klingon. McCoy may not actually have the greatest track record as a physician given his famous catchphrase, "He's dead, Jim." But if nothing, he was passionate. McCoy was less the typical Starfleet hero and more the everyman, just trying to do his job and feeling very inconvenienced by all of this space stuff that got in the way. It's appropriate then, for all of the inconvenience and annoyance that McCoy endured, that he would live to be 137 years old, long enough to talk some folksy smack to another very logical officer of the Enterprise, Lieutenant Commander Data. Dr. McCoy is simply the quintessential Star Trek Doctor, and there are a bunch of classic moments from him. One of my favourites being from the voyage home, where he treated a woman on dialysis with a pill, and in the next scene she's like, "The doctor gave me a pill and I grew a kidney." So there you go, every medical officer ranked. What order would you put them in? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and obviously like us. We're also here on Twitter @TrekCulture, and you can find me on all social medias @MarcusBronzy. BRONZY is how you spell my last name. See you in a bit.